And then someone came and said, hey, can you help me republish my book? I don't like the way it looks. And like, I've never done it before, but I'm great at problem solving and I'm great at figuring things out. I don't have that fear. And et voila. So there you have it. That's how I got here.
And we're live on, I was going to say Book Chat Live, but no, it's oh no, not a live show. And today we have the amazing Deborah, is it
KEY-vin, yep,
KEY-vin?
long
Let me
E.
pronounce your surname. And you are the Chief Inspiration Officer of Highlander Press, as I put down here, which is a publishing very small publishing company. So let's start off by, how did you end up running a
Oh,
publishing company, and how did you end up in publishing? Have you always been in publishing, or was this something you
no,
moved into?
in fact, my undergraduate degree is in chartered accounting, as you would say in the UK. I
Oh,
was a CPA,
yeah.
and I worked for Deloitte and Touche and KPMG as an auditor, which I loved. But that wasn't really conducive to having a family. So I left public accounting and moved into the private sector, worked for a wonderful company for 11 years. And I migrated from internal audit to what's called a Six Sigma black belt. And that has a
Ooh,
very, like, not jujitsu kind of thing, but it's actually a problem solver. And so, using data, I looked at problem solving and coming up with really creative solutions. And I realized that that's actually one of the superpowers that I bring into the publishing industry. And I left there in 2010. My youngest son was diagnosed with autism. And so I spent some time
mm,
really family focused. And I also, during that time, started writing for myself. But to be perfectly honest, I was always an editor. I was always the person that people came to and said, hey, can you make this sound better? Or would you guide me through this? Can you read it to make sure the tone is good? Whatever. Started a couple of company newsletters, contributed to publications here and there. So it wasn't a big surprise to a lot of people that I ended up writing for a living. And
yeah.
so I went to grad school actually to learn how to write novels, and actually wrote one that was part of the whole process. And I have a second and a third actually underway. And so I was writing for authors' websites, and then someone came and said, hey, can you help me republish my book? I don't like the way it looks. And like, I've never done it before, but I'm great at problem solving and I'm great at figuring things out. I don't have that fear. And et voila, fast forward, I really love that part of it because, it's the finance piece, it's the creative piece, it's the editorial piece, and then it's really the marketing piece, all of which I had formal training in. So there you have it. That's how I got here.
Okay, so how many authors have you published then under the Highlander
Perfect,
Press?
perfect question. 38 to date. And we have
Ooh,
8 more
ooh,
coming out by the end of the year.
yeah. So, because you're not quite, this is a company you started. It's not one
No,
you
it's my
joined, is
company.
it?
Yeah.
So yeah. So I'm sure there are people who, because I mean, I've been involved in the whole publishing.
Yeah.
Well, I used to have the Begin Self Publishing podcast, and I've self-published books myself. But there is a very much a traditional idea people have about what a publishing company will be like. And I'm guessing you're much more flexible and modern than like some of the more traditional
Sure.
companies. Um, but what would you say is the biggest difference between you and, say, if somebody went with like Penguin or,
I
I don't
think
know,
there's
some big
some, that's a
publishing
great
company?
question. I think there's some pretty significant differences. So, most people, when they think about being published or desire to be published, they think automatically that traditional publishing is the way to go. And
Yeah,
it's a great avenue. There's no question. They're just a lot more gatekeepers, meaning you have to almost all the time now have an agent. So, you have to convince an agent that your book is worthy, have them then really leverage their contacts in the publishing industry to place your book. And if you're really lucky, get an advance or have a bidding war to get the license for your book. And then it goes into this big machine, which really hasn't changed much since the late 1800s. And it's very slow moving. So it takes a long time once your book is acquired by a publishing house till it's actually published. It can be 3 to 5 years, and that's pretty standard. They really control the editorial process, they control the cover design process, they control the when your book is going to launch. So you have, with in most cases, a little bit of say, but not a lot. And so
Yeah.
you may get a little advance, and that those advances are against your future royalties. And the beautiful thing about that is if you don't earn out your royalties, which means you haven't made that much money in royalties yet, you don't have to pay those advances back. But you do have to share it with your agent, and you do have to share your royalties with your agent. So,
Yeah.
there's not as much money unless you're, selling hundreds of thousands of books, like Stephen King, where you're making a lot of money on the royalty piece, and you can't really make a living just on advances. So that's kind
Brilliant.
of the structure. A hybrid publisher is a lot different in that you do have a lot more say, and it depends upon the publisher. If you can, we could talk about the far left, which is very close to self-publishing, which is a vanity publisher, which will take whatever you give them, and you may get editing services, you may get cover design services,
Mm.
but they'll publish whatever you have. And then you have everything up to and including Highlander Press, which is operates the best of independent publishing and the best of traditional publishing. We pay royalties. We do not pay advances. We pay higher than average royalties as compared to a traditional publisher. And it's a very collaborative process. So we are unique in that we actually have classes for our authors that they attend for 6 months as we're actually editing and laying out and designing their book and getting it ready to be published. But they're learning about that author business. What does it mean to be an author? What
Mm.
is your intellectual property? What do you have once the book is published? How do you market it? What is a great cover? And all of those things. So there is an investment, but that investment primarily covers those classes because it's me teaching. And we also have a lot of experts in the field that come in and teach in their area of expertise. And it's actually one of the things that our authors love the most about the whole process is these classes.
Okay. So you're saying like so. There's two questions I have here because like one is so you kind of you've got some sort of selection
Yes, we have a
process
submissions
presumably.
process. Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't
No.
accept just everybody, and also like the authors have to pay something at least for the training side of things. Is that a fixed amount,
It is pretty
or
much a fixed
like
amount.
how
So
does
it's
that work?
inclusive of
Yeah.
everything. So it's including everything from all of the classes. We have an author community that they get to be a part of, which has like open marketing calls every month and other
Yeah.
classes that they can take for, as our gift. Um, and then it's everything from, you know, it includes the whole publishing process, the ISBNs, the layout, the cover design, multiple cover
Yeah.
designs, editing, everything from developmental editing through copy editing and proofreading. Um, but the big part is the classes. That's one of the major differentiators about how we publish.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sure there. I mean, this is probably the $1 million question that a lot of people who like want to be published. So, what is your? I mean, have you got a fixed criteria for how you select the authors, or is it very much a like you kind of do a sniff test, or are you looking for somebody with a huge social media following? What is your process for
Sure.
selecting who's in and who's not
It's
in?
great. It's a great question. So we do have a submissions process, like a formal submission process. And so the first criteria is Either me or one of our other editors reads the submission and we talk about it. Like, what is the compelling, what's the writing like? Um,
Yeah.
what's the, we do look at social media stuff, but I'm not as concerned about that because I know that part of our process is growing an author's social media and building their website and
Mm.
getting their platform developed, creating an author presence. But I'm curious, like what are we starting? And then we do something unique in that we provide feedback. One of the pieces of feedback is if we're really interested, we'll say, will you send us your whole manuscript? And then we read it and we provide feedback on the first 10 pages. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One is for us, because we are a relatively small publisher, really medium sized, we want to make sure that the books that we're publishing, we know we can do a great job with. We want to
Yeah.
assess how the author receives feedback, and we want them to get a sense of how we edit.
Yeah.
Because I firmly believe that when you have a trusting relationship with your editor, you can go much farther faster, and you can have that open dialogue that is productive for both sides. And that's important. So the energetic exchange and the energetic match is a huge part of our component.
And do you have any kind of bias towards particular genres or types of books? I mean, like literary fiction about how I looked at the wallpaper for 5 months, or sort of frisky vampire love action
Yeah.
4 sort of thing. Do you have that? Do you have genres that you tend to gravitate
Well,
to?
so
Are you much
personally,
more?
I'm a huge fan of YA and I'm a huge fan
Yeah,
of historical fiction. That being said,
yeah,
um, I learned how to write literary fiction, so I tend to go towards books that stimulate me intellectually. But we've published everything from sci-fi, like sci-fi cyberpunk. We just published last month. It's done really well, and getting garnering really great reviews. We just published this little fantasy, not little fantasy,
mm,
literary fantasy, and it's so beautifully written. Again, getting great reviews. We have YA paranormal romance. We have some YA romance books for fiction. We do a lot of nonfiction, memoir, and or uh, entrepreneurial uh, nonfiction. So those are things that we have done, and children's. We do some children's books as well. We do those very sparingly, and those children's books have to have a bigger mission than just publishing a children's book. For example,
yeah,
we published actually a young woman who was in high school still. She was an illustrator, but she grew up. Her family were fostering other family, children, and so she wrote and illustrated a book about being part of a foster family and what that's like. And so it's like a bigger mission to expand empathy and connection and have kids look at things a little bit differently, and their caregivers too, right? Their parents are caregivers.
yeah. So, what are some of the success stories you've had? Like, presumably, because you publish so many authors and books, you must have had some people who've done really well. And have you had the odd book that, like, you thought everything looks right and it's just not happened?
Yeah, so yes, and so I
Yeah,
would say our last two fiction books, which is Juris Ex Machina, a sci-fi
yeah,
cyberpunk. I mean, it got a 5-star rating from Midwest Book Review, which is not inconsequential. Um, that author has been all over the United States doing talks. He was at the American Library Association, really getting excellent feedback. The other is 14 Stones. This is the second edition of this book. The first was published specifically in New Zealand. So this has a much broader audience, and she's just been getting a lot of, again, really great reviews with a lot of attention, getting asked to be interviewed, that kind of thing. One of our nonfiction books, the author really leveraged her connections, and she's just been on the speaking circuit. She took what she wrote, had an incredible launch because she had a big community already, and she's leveraged that to go talk about self-care at the collegiate level with athletes in particular.
No.
So,
Yeah.
but I think that there are most of our authors, I think, are successful. They're successful, they're content, and they have the tools that they need to keep going to market their books without being, a used car salesman, kind of a salesperson. We did have one author, though, on the other end who really wasn't interested in leveraging social media. He wasn't on social media, didn't like actively activate any of our recommendations. And he was really reliant on another person's email list, just one email list. He didn't even have an email list. And so
Yeah.
that book did not meet our basic kind of launch day standards. But again, here's the thing is we're in partnership with our authors. So we're doing our part, but the author has to do their part as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I wonder what you were saying about John Marley's book, because I
Oh,
interviewed him yesterday on the show.
fantastic.
Um, on YouTube, it will be a week ahead
Okay.
of you, so it won't be quite as close. But yeah, we rearranged this interview for now, so it wasn't like intended. I forgot how
It
I
was
met him
from
in the
me.
first place.
Yeah,
I think it was you. Yeah. Um, so we touched on it there, and this is one of the biggest. How whoever you're published with, or however you publish it, so much of having a book be successful is
absolutely.
marketing. So, what kind of training do you give? Is it mainly social media? You've mentioned
Mhm.
email lists, which I think are important. So, without giving away
Sure.
all of your secret sauce stuff, but as generally as possible, what kind of things are you recommending these authors do for their
It's a
launch of
great
their book?
question. And it's not just specifically for the launch, but it's the ongoing piece. So
Yeah,
we actually have, I think, 5 or 6 classes that are directly related to marketing. Right up front, one of our first classes is leveraging social media and finding where your readers are, and then either leveraging what you're already doing or growing more comfortable in that place to attract the right kind of readers. And we talk about following other people and really truly engaged in a authentic way, not just buy
yeah,
my book. So that's one way. We also teach them, we talk about their website and how their website is integral into getting people onto their email list, and how we can leverage something from their book or their next book, or a checklist or something, flat swag, to get people onto their email list so we can grow that with people who will eventually become raving fans, and then nurturing those
yeah,
people on a newsletter. We talk about public relations and how that's different, but tangential to marketing, and some of the things that they can do themselves. We provide book one sheets for all of our authors so they can get to libraries and local bookstores. We also provide them with electronic press kit, which can be leveraged for um, speaking engagements or podcast interviews, so that they can get really great in-depth questions. We talk about ongoing book marketing, like how they are the we're going to do ongoing book marketing, but they also have the tools. So we provide graphics and posts and suggestions for newsletters, and just suggestions. We also provide them with a list of potential formal reviewers who may want to read their book. Um, and then we provide whatever resources they need to make that happen. If they have the ability and the desire to do in-person events, we talk about that. We have a whole checklist to how to have a successful event. And then oftentimes, if we're able to go, we show up ourselves.
Okay. And are you mainly focused on US sales, or have you got like globe suggestions for the rest of the world? Because obviously, I think it's probably easier to just focus on the US if you're based in the
Yes,
US.
and we
But
do have authors in Denmark and Norway and the UK.
yeah,
Um, I think we may have we have definitely several Canadian authors, so that we do have to
yeah,
tweak some of the recommendations, but on the whole, everything that we're recommending, all authors, regardless of where they are, if they want to be successful and have long-term sales and long-term influence,
yeah,
um, these are all things that can be addressed. And during our cohort classes, if we often have mixed countries, I'll say, here's what we do in
yeah,
the US, and then here's what we do in your specific country.
yeah. Okay. And format wise, like I'm fairly sure because I've seen quite a few you do paperback and presumably do hardback as well. But do you do audio books? And have you got? Are you just publishing to Amazon, or are you making it available for ordering in bookstores? What kind of options
Yeah,
do you
so
provide
we
there to your authors?
we with few exceptions, and I'll tell you what the exceptions are in a moment. With few exceptions, we always do a paperback and we always do a digital version, and we go wide. So we
Yeah,
publish directly on Amazon because Amazon.
yeah,
We do
yeah,
both Kindle and print. Then we use Ingram Spark, which is an international distributor
yeah,
of books that can get it into libraries and bookstores, and anybody who has an account with Ingram can order directly. So we do that in the print version. And then we use a
yeah,
company called Draft to Digital, which gets it into
yeah.
all other digital platforms and gets it into libraries using Overcast, Overdrive. I keep saying Overcast, Overdrive. Yeah.
Overdrive, yeah, it's Overdrive.
So I believe in going wide. We do hardbacks right now are challenging to price because the materials are so
Yeah,
expensive. So we did it like for John Maley's book, we did a hardback, and I've done hardbacks for some children's books. But for most people, they're buying paperback. And so if
yeah,
the author really wants it, we have the capacity to do hardback, and I'm willing to do it. We just have to price it so that it's worthwhile, and I don't know that right now it's the best time to do that.
yeah. But it sounds like audiobooks aren't something you're doing at the moment, or you're not doing
Yeah,
forever. Are you? If the author's willing to record it themselves, will you do
absolutely. Yeah,
audiobooks? Or
absolutely. And in fact,
yeah,
it's I've learned how to do audiobooks. I've recorded um, parts of audiobooks, and holy moly, is that a process with a sound technician and all of that. Totally
yeah,
worth it. And I think what I often will say is, well, one of the things that we've noticed is that if we track somebody's digital sales, you can almost guarantee that that's how well their audiobook will do. So some books, people just want the paperback, but in some cases, they're really looking for more digital sales. And those actually are going to be a good representation of what an audiobook success might look like.
yeah. Um, One of the things you mentioned earlier on is that, like, it sounds like the person has to have written the book before they approach you. Do you ever? Does anybody ever come to you with like just an
Yes,
idea and then say like, "Well, I want you to help me write this, do the whole development side"? Is that something that people have approached
absolutely.
you
In
with, and would
fact,
you take that?
so much so that we actually started our storytellers lab, which has
Yeah,
four tracks. One is a memoir track, one is a fiction track, one is more of a lead generation or expert level book, so a shorter book, and then one's a thought leader nonfiction, like so it could be a biography, autobiography.
yeah,
Um, we have those four tracks. I've done one-on-one work with people where I do like a VIP session where we'll listen and I'll come up with the outline and it'll be a give and take back and forth. We have a weekly free write in that anybody can come to. And I've had many authors write their entire books in a 2 hour block a week. So they just come on our
Yeah.
Zoom link, and it's free. There's no registration. It's meant for anybody who just wants a place to write. Very, we set that intention and off we go.
Okay. So my final, well, it might not be my final question, but the final question I thought of, like, how important are genre, I'll not say stereo. I know I can't remember what the word is, but not stereotypes. But like certain genres have certain things that people expect to happen in them. Like I'm told that with romance, you should always have a happy ending, or else your book will fail. How much are you helping authors, and how much have you seen in terms of, like, because obviously every now and then a book comes and totally ruins all of there's nothing like what it's supposed to do and does
Yeah.
really well. But how important are I suppose
Like
genre
our
stereotypes? I don't
expectations.
know what the right word.
I think
Yeah,
that in whole they exist for a reason, right? We find what we really like and we tend to stick to it. And I think there's also room for an author to have some freedom to break that stereotype. Um, I
yeah,
personally love a nice happy ending at the end of every book. I get more frustrated when it's an open ending and I have to figure it out myself. I don't find
yeah,
those books in particular very satisfying. But I also think, like, I'll give an example. We're editing a memoir right now that's a phenomenal memoir. It's coming out on November 11th this fall. And the author wrote it in present tense, even though it happened
yeah,
some years, 17 years ago. And we went back and forth about why did she choose present tense as opposed to past tense? Because clearly everything happened in the past.
yeah,
And she convinced me that it worked. And as long as we're consistent, okay, I'll buy it. I'll buy it. It's
yeah.
and I've written essays myself where I've written it a second person, present tense, and
Mm,
I have
yeah,
had pushback, but it's like it was a very deliberate choice on my part because I wanted the reader or the listener to feel uncomfortable. Like I did that with deliberation. So as long as the author has a reasonable reason for why they're setting up their book in the way that they want, we're going to work with that author to make sure that they can be as successful with it as possible. If something's absolutely not going to, like, we've had essays in a humor book that when the book was originally drafted, maybe some of these stories would have been funnier than they are today. And I'm like, yeah, we cannot publish this story because it's tone
mm,
deaf to where we are in the world right now. So
yeah,
I'm very honest. And again, if I don't think we can do a good job, I'm going to let the author know. Like that is like prime directive number one, because
yeah.
I want them to succeed. And if we're not the right fit, I still want them to succeed.
Okay. So to finish off, let's say somebody's watched this, and I'm sure you might get submissions out of this somewhere along the line, millions of places that it's been distributed. How can how can somebody submit a book to you? How can somebody get in touch with you? Maybe somebody just wants to join along with your
Yeah,
writing
it's a
groups and
great
things.
question.
How how can they get in touch with you? How can they interact with the
Sure.
company? Well,
So
yeah, tell us all your
our
websites.
website is highlanderpressbooks.com. And we
Yeah,
have a specific submissions page that will talk about, how to submit, what things we accept and what things we don't. We have only a few things that we really don't accept. And
yeah,
and then how to submit. At the bottom, it tells you exactly what you need to do and what to submit. And there's a form you fill out and you go into the process. And one of us, we always 100% of the time get back to anybody who submits, because that's, as an author, a pet peeve where you're kind of throwing it into the
yeah,
wind and not knowing. So they get, first of all, a confirmation email. If they want to join our write in, that is also on our website. as well. There's a link directly to our write-ins. If they want to engage with me, the best place is probably on LinkedIn. We have a
Yeah.
business page, Highlander Press Books, and then we also just have me. So if they connect with me and they have any questions, I'm always willing to have a coffee date and answer any questions that anybody has about publishing or their writing or anything.
Yeah. And presumably they just have to get your surname pronunciation right.
Yes,
That's the main thing. You're a Kiwi, all right.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being a guest today, and thanks for all the people who've been watching on wherever they've been watching. And it's
It's
been
been
great to
great to
have
be
you.
here,
And
Tim. Thank
like,
you.
This is what God requires.